The dusty main street of Genoa, Nevada stretched before Tessa Morgan like a cruel reminder of every broken promise her husband had ever made. And on this scorching August afternoon in 1869, she stood outside the general store clutching a letter that confirmed her worst fears, while townspeople whispered behind gloved hands about how Thomas Morgan had run off with a saloon girl barely 20 years old. Tessa was 32, and until 3 weeks ago she had believed her marriage was solid despite its flaws. Thomas had been a rancher, moderately successful, and they had built a life together over 9 years of marriage. No children had come, which Thomas had blamed on her, though the doctor suggested otherwise, and now she understood why he had grown so distant over the past year. The letter in her trembling hands was from Thomas himself, written in his cramped handwriting, explaining that he had fallen in love with someone younger and more exciting, someone who made him feel alive again. He had sold their ranch to a buyer from California and left her exactly $300, which he seemed to think was generous. The house they had lived in was rented, and the landlord wanted her out by the end of the month. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her reticule, refusing to let the tears come where anyone could see. Tessa had always been strong, the kind of woman who could birth a calf, mend a fence, and cook a full dinner without breaking stride. Her dark auburn hair was pinned in a practical bun, and her green eyes, though red-rimmed from crying the night before, held a determination that her mother had instilled in her since childhood. She would not crumble in public. The general store door opened behind her, and Martha Henderson, the shopkeeper's wife, touched her arm gently. "Tessa, dear, if you need anything at all." "Thank you, Martha, but I am managing," Tessa said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her chest. She walked down the wooden sidewalk, her boots clicking against the planks, past the blacksmith shop where sparks flew from heated iron, past the saloon where her husband had met his new love, past the bank where she would need to deposit what little money she had left. Genoa was a small town nestled in the Carson Valley, surrounded by the Sierra Nevada mountains, and everyone knew everyone else's business. By now, the whole town knew that Thomas Morgan had abandoned his wife for a girl young enough to be his daughter. The shame burned hotter than the August sun beating down on her bonnet. She needed work. She needed a place to live. She needed to figure out how to survive in a world that was not kind to women alone. The $300 would last a few months if she was careful, but then what? She had skills, certainly, but respectable work for women was limited to teaching, seamstress work, or domestic service. The school already had a teacher, and her sewing skills, while adequate, were not exceptional enough to build a business. As she approached the bank, a commotion near the livery stable caught her attention. A horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, was rearing and bucking while several men shouted and scattered. The animal was clearly terrified, eyes rolling white, hooves flashing dangerously close to anyone foolish enough to approach. Old Pete, who ran the stable, was yelling for someone to grab the rope, but the horse had broken free from whatever had been restraining it. Tessa stopped, watching as the chaos unfolded. She had always had a way with horses, a patience that Thomas had mocked as wasted sentimentality. But she could see what the men could not, that the horse was not vicious but frightened. Something had spooked it badly. Without thinking, she stepped off the sidewalk and walked slowly toward the panicked animal. Pete shouted at her to get back, but she ignored him. She kept her movements slow and deliberate, her hands visible and empty. She began to hum, a low tune her father had taught her years ago when she was just a girl learning to gentle her first pony. The stallion's ears swiveled toward her, and though it continued to dance and snort, it did not charge. Tessa kept humming, kept walking slowly forward, her eyes averted so as not to challenge the animal. When she was close enough, she extended her hand, letting the horse catch her scent. Its nostrils flared, taking her in, and gradually the wild panic in its eyes began to calm. "Easy now," she murmured, her voice soft and melodic. "Nobody here wants to hurt you. Easy." She could see now what had caused the problem. A nail was sticking up from the saddle blanket, and it had been digging into the horse's back. No wonder the poor creature had lost its mind. She carefully reached for the trailing rope, moving slowly enough that the horse could step away if it chose. It did not. Instead, it lowered its great head and blew out a long breath, the fight draining from its body. Tessa gathered the rope and ran her free hand along the stallion's neck, continuing to hum and murmur reassurances. She walked the horse in a slow circle, letting it calm fully before leading it back toward the stable. The gathered crowd parted, and she heard their murmurs of amazement, but she focused only on the animal in her care. A man stepped forward from the crowd, and Tessa looked up into the bluest eyes she had ever seen. He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of endless days outdoors. His dark brown hair curled slightly beneath his dusty hat, and his jaw was strong and clean-shaven. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy: denim pants, a worn cotton shirt, leather vest, and a red bandana around his neck. A gun belt sat low on his hips, but his hands were relaxed at his sides. "That is my horse," he said, his voice a low rumble with a hint of surprise. "I've been trying to settle him for near an hour." "How did you do that?" "He had a nail bothering him," Tessa explained, pointing to the saddle blanket. "Once he realized I was not going to hurt him, he calmed right down. Animals usually just need someone to listen to what they are trying to say." The cowboy moved closer, examining the blanket, and his expression darkened. "I paid good money for this tack in Sacramento, and they told me it was quality work. I should have checked more carefully." He looked back at Tessa, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. "You likely saved someone from a nasty kick, maybe worse. I am grateful. My name is William Cartwright, though most folks call me Will." "Tessa Morgan," she replied, then immediately wished she had not given her married name, but it was still her legal name, regardless of Thomas's abandonment. "Mrs. Morgan," Will said, tipping his hat politely. "Your husband is a lucky man to have a wife with such skills." The words hit her like a physical blow, and she must have flinched because Will's expression immediately changed from friendly to concerned. Before she could formulate a response, Martha Henderson, who had been watching from the store, called out, "Tessa is currently without a husband, Mr. Cartwright. Thomas Morgan ran off with a saloon girl and left her high and dry." Tessa wanted the ground to open and swallow her. The public humiliation was complete. She handed the rope to Will, muttered something about needing to be elsewhere, and turned to flee, but Will's voice stopped her. "Mrs. Morgan, wait." She paused but did not turn around, her shoulders rigid with mortification. "I am sorry for your troubles," Will said, and his voice was gentle, devoid of pity or judgment. "A man who would leave a woman like you is a fool, but I wonder if I might impose on you for some help. I have 6 horses that need gentling, and I am not having much success. I would pay you fairly for your time and expertise. I am starting a ranch about 5 miles north of here, and I need someone who understands horses the way you clearly do." Tessa turned slowly, searching his face for mockery or inappropriate suggestion, but she found only sincerity. "You want to hire me?" "I do. $2 a day, and meals included if you are willing to ride out to the property. I have a cook who makes a fine stew, and the work would be legitimate. I could use someone starting tomorrow if you are available." $2 a day was more than fair, more than generous actually. It was the kind of offer that could change everything, that could give her a path forward when she had thought all paths were closed. But she barely knew this man, and a woman's reputation was fragile enough without working alone with a stranger on an isolated ranch. As if reading her thoughts, Will added, "My cook is a woman, Mrs. Patterson, a widow who has been with me since I started planning this venture. She runs the house, such as it is right now, and she would be present at all times. Everything would be proper and respectable, I give you my word." Old Pete, who had been listening to the whole exchange, spoke up. "Will Cartwright is a good man, Mrs. Morgan. I have known him since he was a boy growing up in Carson City. His word is solid as they come." Tessa looked at Will, at his honest blue eyes and work-worn hands, and made a decision that felt both terrifying and right. "Tomorrow morning, then. What time should I arrive?" "I will pick you up at 7 if that suits. Where are you staying?" She gave him the address of the small house she would have to vacate soon, and they made arrangements. Will thanked her again for handling his horse, and she walked away feeling as though the world had shifted slightly on its axis. She had gone from utterly hopeless to employed in the span of 10 minutes. That night, lying in the bed she had once shared with Thomas, Tessa stared at the ceiling and wondered if she was making a mistake. But what choice did she have? She could take charity from the church, she could try to find work as a domestic servant in someone's home, or she could accept Will Cartwright's offer and maintain some measure of independence. When framed that way, the choice was obvious. Will arrived precisely at 7 the next morning, driving a well-maintained wagon. He helped her up to the seat with easy courtesy, and they set off through the awakening town. The morning air was cool and fresh, a temporary reprieve before the heat of the day settled in. The Sierra Nevada mountains rose dramatically to the west, their peaks still holding patches of snow even in late summer. "I appreciate you giving me this chance," Tessa said as they left the town behind. "I appreciate you accepting," Will replied, his hands steady on the reins. "Good horse handlers are rare. Most people try to break a horse's spirit, but you clearly understand that is not the way." They talked as they traveled, and Tessa learned that Will had spent the last 10 years working as a ranch hand on various spreads throughout Nevada and California. He had saved every penny he could, and when a piece of land came available in the Carson Valley, he had jumped at the opportunity. The ranch was small, only 160 acres, but it had good water and grazing. His plan was to raise horses primarily, with some cattle for additional income. "It is not much yet," he admitted as they turned onto a rough track that led away from the main road. "The house is barely more than a cabin and the barn needs work, but it has potential. I can see what it will become." Tessa understood that kind of vision, the ability to see beyond present circumstances to future possibilities. She had once had dreams too, before they had been crushed under the weight of a failing marriage. The ranch came into view, and Will had not been exaggerating about its rough state. The cabin was small, 1-story, built from logs with a stone chimney. The barn was larger but showed signs of age and neglect. Several corrals had been built from freshly cut timber, and in them stood the horses Will had mentioned. They were beautiful animals, clearly well-bred, and they watched the wagons approach with alert curiosity. A woman emerged from the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 50, with gray-streaked brown hair and a face that suggested she had seen her share of hardship but had not let it embitter her. "You must be Mrs. Morgan," she called out in greeting. "I am Helen Patterson. Come in and have some coffee before you start working." I imagine the ride gave you an appetite. The cabin's interior was simple but clean. A large fireplace dominated one wall with a cooking area set up nearby. A rough table and chairs occupied the center of the room, and Tessa could see a doorway leading to what must be a bedroom in the back. Everything spoke of hard work and limited resources, but also of care. Wildflowers sat in a jar on the table, and the floor had been swept spotless. Over coffee and fresh biscuits, Helen explained the household arrangements. Mr. Cartwright sleeps in the small room off the barn. I have the bedroom here in the cabin. It is all very proper, as it should be. He is a good employer, and I have had no cause for complaint. The reassurance eased something in Tessa's chest that she had not realized was tight. After breakfast, Will walked her out to the corrals and introduced her to the horses. There were 6 in total, ranging from 3 to 5 years old. They had been wild-caught and had received only minimal handling. I need them gentled enough to sell or use for ranch work, Will explained. I do not have the time or the expertise to do it properly. Most of what I know about horses I learned from necessity, not skill. Tessa studied each animal carefully, noting their temperaments and physical conditions. They were all healthy, which spoke well of Will's basic care, but they were skittish and uncertain around humans. This will take time, she said honestly. Weeks, not days. Each horse is different and they will progress at their own pace. I expected as much. Take the time needed to do it right. And so began a routine that would stretch through the remainder of August and into September. Each morning, Will collected Tessa from town and brought her to the ranch. She spent her days working with the horses, and slowly, patiently, she earned their trust. She started with simply being present in their space, letting them grow accustomed to her scent and voice. Then she progressed to touching, grooming, and eventually to leading and basic commands. Will often worked nearby, mending fences or working on the barn, and Tessa found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking. He moved with an easy confidence, capable and strong but never arrogant. He was patient with the animals and respectful to both her and Helen. He rarely spoke of his past, but she gathered that he had grown up without much, the son of a washwoman and an unknown father. Everything he had earned through relentless work. She also noticed the way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was focused on a horse. There was admiration in his gaze, and something warmer that made her heart beat faster. But he never said or did anything inappropriate. He treated her as a valued employee, and nothing more, even as the air between them seemed to grow charged with unspoken possibilities. One afternoon in mid-September, as Tessa was leading one of the horses around the corral, Will approached with a hesitant expression. "Mrs. Morgan, I wonder if I might ask you something of a personal nature." She stopped, her hand on the horse's halter, and waited. "You plan to stay in Genoa?" "I only ask because Helen mentioned that your housing situation was temporary." Tessa felt heat rise to her cheeks. Of course Helen would have heard the town gossip. "I have been looking for a more permanent arrangement," she admitted. "But housing for a single woman is limited and expensive. I may need to move to a larger town, Virginia City perhaps, where there are more opportunities." Something flickered across Will's face, an emotion too quick to identify. "I see. That would be a long commute for this work." "Yes," she agreed quietly. "I have been meaning to speak with you about that. I am grateful for the employment, but once these horses are gentled, you will not need me anymore. I should be planning for what comes next." Will was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes searching her face. What if there was another option? "What do you mean?" He took off his hat, running his hand through his hair in a gesture she had come to recognize as nervousness. "The cabin has a second room that I have been meaning to finish. It was meant to be a separate bedroom with its own entrance. If I completed it, you could live here on the ranch. You would have your own private space and Helen would be here as well, so everything would be proper. You could continue working with the horses, and I would pay you a regular salary plus room and board." Tessa stared at him, trying to understand what he was offering and why. "That is very generous, but I do not understand why you would do this." Will met her gaze directly. "Because you are the best horse handler I have ever seen. Because I am building something here, and I could use someone with your skills as a permanent part of it. And because," he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, "I have come to value your presence here. These past weeks, seeing you work with the animals, talking with you at lunch, it has made me realize that this ranch was missing something essential. I was so focused on the practical aspects that I forgot that a place is made by the people who inhabit it." Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Mr. Cartwright, Will, please. Will, I need to be very clear about something. I am still married in the eyes of the law. My husband abandoned me, but there has been no divorce. I do not even know where Thomas is to serve him papers. Whatever you might be suggesting, I am suggesting employment and housing," Will interrupted gently. "Nothing improper. I would not compromise your reputation or my own honor. But I would be lying if I said I had not developed feelings for you, Tessa." "May I call you Tessa?" She nodded, unable to speak. "You are remarkable," he continued, his voice low and earnest. "The way you handle the horses, the quiet strength you show every day despite what you have been through. How your husband could leave you for anyone else, let alone some girl who probably does not have half your character or intelligence, is beyond my comprehension. His loss is my fortune, if you will allow it to be. I am not asking for anything beyond your presence here and the possibility that, in time, when your legal situation is resolved, you might consider me as more than just an employer." Tears sprang to Tessa's eyes, the first she had allowed anyone to see since Thomas had left. "You hardly know me." "I know enough. I know you are kind to animals and respectful to Helen. I know you work harder than most men I have employed. I know you hold your head high even when people whisper about you in town. I know that when you smile, which is rare, it lights up your whole face. And I know that I would very much like the opportunity to know everything else." The horse beside her stamped impatiently, reminding her where they were. She looked down at her dusty boots, then back up at Will's honest face. "I would need my own space, as you said. And everything would need to be proper and above reproach. Absolutely. And you would need to understand that I do not know when or if I could pursue anything beyond employment. The situation with Thomas is complicated. I am a patient man, Tessa. I have spent 10 years saving for this ranch. I can wait as long as necessary for something or someone truly worthwhile." She made her decision, another leap of faith into an uncertain future. "Then yes, I accept your offer. And Will, I should tell you that I have felt something growing between us as well. I have tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself it was inappropriate or impossible, but I cannot deny that working here has been the happiest I have been in years." The smile that broke across Will's face was like sunrise after a long, dark night. He did not reach for her, did not do anything that could be misconstrued, but the joy in his eyes was unmistakable. "I will start work on that room immediately. In the meantime, Helen has already said you are welcome to stay in the cabin with her if you need to leave your current housing before the room is ready." Over the next 2 weeks, Will threw himself into finishing the second room. He worked early in the mornings before Tessa arrived and late into the evenings after she left. The room took shape quickly, with a real window that looked out over the mountains, a sturdy door with a lock, and enough space for a bed, dresser, and small table. He even built a private entrance so Tessa could come and go without walking through the main cabin. Helen watched the construction with knowing eyes. "That man is building you more than just a room," she commented one afternoon as she and Tessa prepared vegetables for dinner. "He is building you a future if you want it. It feels too soon, Tessa confessed. Thomas left less than 2 months ago, and here I am accepting housing from another man. What will people say? People will say what they always say, Helen replied pragmatically. But those who matter will see the truth. Will Cartwright is a good man, and you are a good woman. If you find happiness together after what you have been through, then anyone with a heart will celebrate that. I am still married. In name only. Thomas Morgan broke those vows when he left. You owe him nothing, Tessa, least of all your loyalty. Tessa wanted to believe that, but the shame of being abandoned, of being chosen against, still burned. Some nights she lay awake wondering what was wrong with her, what deficiency had driven Thomas to a younger woman's arms. She knew, intellectually, that his choices were his own, that they reflected on his character and not hers. But the heart did not always listen to the intellect. The room was finished by the end of September, and Tessa moved her few belongings in on a crisp autumn morning. Will and Helen helped her arrange everything, and when it was done, she stood in the center of her new home and felt something she had not felt in years. Safe. That evening, the three of them shared dinner at the cabin's main table. Helen had made a celebratory roast chicken, and they talked easily about the ranch's progress. 2 of the horses were now ready to be sold, and Will had already found buyers. The money would go toward finishing the barn and purchasing more stock in the spring. I was thinking, Will said as they cleared the dishes, that we should plan a trip to Carson City next month. There is a stock auction, and I want to look at some breeding mares. Tessa, I would value your opinion on which animals to bid on if you are willing to come. I would be happy to, she replied, pleased to be included in such decisions. The trip to Carson City happened on a bright October morning. Helen stayed behind to manage the ranch, and Will drove Tessa in the wagon through the turning aspens and cottonwoods that lined the Carson River. The mountains were dusted with early snow, and the air had a sharp clarity that made everything seem more vivid. The auction was held at a large ranch outside the city, and dozens of people had gathered to view and bid on the livestock. Tessa walked among the horses, examining conformation, temperament, and health. She made notes about which animals she thought would be good investments, and Will listened carefully to every observation. When the bidding started, he managed to secure 3 young mares at reasonable prices. The sellers, impressed by Tessa's knowledge, asked if she did consulting work. Before she could respond, Will spoke up with evident pride. She is my ranch's head horse trainer, best in the state in my opinion. The title, unofficial as it was, filled Tessa with warmth. Head horse trainer. It made her sound professional and valued, which was exactly how Will treated her. On the drive back, with the 3 new mares tied to the back of the wagon, Will said, I meant what I told them. You are the best, Tessa. This ranch would not be what it is becoming without you. You would have managed, maybe, but it would not have been as good, and I certainly would not have been as happy. She looked at him, at his strong profile and gentle eyes, and felt her carefully maintained walls beginning to crumble. Will, I need to be honest with you about something. I have been thinking about filing for divorce from Thomas. Not because of you, or not only because of you, but because I deserve to move forward with my life. He made his choice, and I need to make mine. Will's hands tightened on the reins. What does that process involve? I would need to travel to Virginia City and file papers with the court. Nevada has relatively liberal divorce laws compared to other states. Desertion is grounds enough, especially since Thomas left me destitute. But I would need to hire a lawyer, and that requires money I do not have yet. I will lend you the money. No, Tessa said firmly. This is something I need to do for myself. I am saving from my wages. By spring I should have enough. Spring is months away. Then it will take months. Will, I appreciate everything you have done for me, but I cannot be dependent on you or any man in that way. I need to stand on my own feet before I can even think about standing beside someone else." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I understand, and I respect that. But Tessa, I want you to know that when you are ready, when all the legal matters are settled, I would very much like to court you properly. Not as an employer, but as a man who has fallen deeply in love with you." Her breath caught. They had danced around these feelings for weeks, but hearing him say the words so plainly was overwhelming. "You love me." "I do. I think I have since that first day when you calmed my horse and I saw the strength and gentleness in you. It has only grown stronger every day since. I wake up looking forward to seeing you, and I go to sleep thinking about the conversations we shared. You have become essential to my happiness, Tessa, and I cannot imagine my future without you in it." Tears tracked down her cheeks, but they were not tears of sorrow. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been trying not to, trying to tell myself it was too soon or too complicated, but I cannot help it. You make me feel valued and seen in a way I have never experienced. When I am with you, I remember who I am beneath all the hurt and shame." Will pulled the wagon to a stop on the side of the road. He turned to face her fully, and with gentle care, he reached out and wiped the tears from her face with his thumb. "There is no shame in loving or being loved, Tessa. What happened with Thomas was not your fault. You are brilliant and beautiful and deserving of every good thing. I want to believe that. Then let me spend every day proving it to you." She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes and letting herself feel the warmth of his hand against her skin. It was the first time they had truly touched beyond accidental brushes and helping hands, and it felt like coming home. They stayed like that for several long minutes, the autumn wind rustling the leaves around them, the horses waiting patiently. When they finally resumed their journey, something fundamental had shifted between them. They were no longer employer and employee, or even just friends. They were two people who loved each other and were committed to building a future together, however long that might take. The winter months tested that commitment in unexpected ways. Snow came early to the Carson Valley, and the ranch work became harder. Tessa threw herself into training the new mares and continuing the education of the other horses. Will worked on winterizing the buildings and ensuring they had adequate feed stored. Helen managed the household with cheerful efficiency, and the three of them became a small, tight-knit family. The people of Genoa slowly stopped gossiping about Tessa Morgan and her living arrangements. Perhaps it was because Helen's presence made everything undeniably proper, or perhaps it was because Tessa held her head high and refused to act ashamed. She went to church on Sundays, helped with community events, and conducted herself with dignity. Those who had scorned her began to grudgingly respect her, and some even apologized for their earlier judgments. In December, Tessa received an unexpected letter. It was from a lawyer in Sacramento, informing her that Thomas Morgan had been killed in a mining accident in the mountains east of the city. He had been working a silver claim with his young lover, and a tunnel had collapsed. There were no other survivors. The lawyer had tracked down Tessa because Thomas had left a small life insurance policy, and she was listed as the beneficiary. The amount was $500. Tessa sat in her room, staring at the letter, feeling nothing but a strange emptiness. Thomas was dead. The man she had been married to, who had shared her bed and her life for 9 years, was gone. She had thought she would feel something, grief or anger or relief, but instead there was just a hollow absence. She walked to the main cabin where Will was reviewing accounts by lamplight. He looked up as she entered, and his expression immediately shifted to concern. "What is wrong?" She handed him the letter without a word. He read it carefully, his jaw tightening. When he finished, he set it down and came to her, taking her hands in his. "I am sorry, Tessa. However you feel about this, whatever you are experiencing, it is valid." "I do not know what I feel," she admitted. "Is it wrong that I am not sad? He hurt me so badly, and now he is dead, and all I can think is that at least I do not have to divorce him." "That is not wrong. It is honest." Thomas made his choices, and they led him where they led. You are allowed to feel relief that your legal situation is simpler now. You are allowed to grieve for the marriage you thought you had, even if you do not grieve for the man himself. She collapsed into Will's arms, and he held her while she cried. These tears were different from before, a release of everything she had been carrying. The pain of rejection, the anger at being abandoned, the fear of an uncertain future, and now the strange, complicated grief of learning her husband was dead. Will held her through all of it, his arms strong and steady, his heartbeat a reassuring rhythm beneath her ear. When she finally calmed, he led her to the table and made her tea while Helen appeared with a warm blanket. They sat with her until late into the night, not offering empty platitudes but simply being present. It was exactly what she needed. The insurance money changed things significantly. Tessa no longer needed to save every penny from her wages. She could afford to buy new clothes, to purchase small luxuries, to feel secure in a way she had not since Thomas left. But more than that, it represented a final severing of ties to her old life. She was no longer Thomas Morgan's abandoned wife. She was Tessa Morgan, independent woman and head horse trainer for the Cartwright Ranch. Christmas came, and Will gave her a beautiful leather-bound journal. "For recording your observations about the horses," he explained. "I see you making notes on scraps of paper, and I thought you deserved something better." She gave him a pair of leather work gloves she had commissioned from the town's leather worker, carefully sized to his large hands. "So you stopped tearing up your knuckles on the wire fencing," she said. Helen received gifts from both of them, and they spent Christmas Day in warm companionship, eating a fine meal and singing carols by the fire. It was the best Christmas Tessa could remember in years, maybe ever. As winter softened into early spring, Will began to court Tessa in earnest. They took walks around the property in the evenings, his hand occasionally brushing hers before finally, one twilight in March, he took her hand properly and laced their fingers together. They talked about everything, childhoods and dreams, fears and hopes, the big questions and the small daily observations that make up a life. "I want children," Tessa confessed one evening as they watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. "Thomas always said we did not have any because of some deficiency in me, but the doctor suggested it might have been him. I do not know if I can have children, but I would like to try with the right partner." "I want children too," Will said. "I grew up alone and I always imagined having a big family someday. But Tessa, even if children do not come, even if it is just the two of us, that would be enough. You would be enough." She turned to face him, her heart full to bursting. "Will Cartwright, you are the best man I have ever known." "Then marry me," he said, dropping to one knee right there in the grass. "I know it has not been long, and I know you have been through hell and back, but I love you with everything I am. I want to build this ranch with you. I want to raise horses and children with you. I want to grow old with you. Tessa Morgan, will you be my wife?" The yes burst from her lips before she even had to think. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed with pure joy. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his work-roughened hands and kissed her for the first time. It was gentle and reverent and full of promise, and Tessa felt every broken piece of her heart click back into place, stronger than before. They were married in April of 1870, in a simple ceremony at the church in Genoa. Helen stood up for Tessa, and Pete from the livery stable stood up for Will. The whole town came to the wedding, and if anyone remembered the scandal from less than a year before, they kept it to themselves. Tessa wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk that Helen had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers from the mountain meadows. Will wore his Sunday best and looked so handsome that Tessa could barely breathe. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Will kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation sniffled into their handkerchiefs. At the reception in the town hall, people came up to congratulate them and wish them well. Martha Henderson, who had been one of the first to show Tessa kindness after Thomas left, hugged her tightly and whispered, "You deserve this happiness, dear. You deserve all of it." The ranch became their shared project, their joint dream. Tessa's skill with horses attracted attention from across the state, and people began bringing difficult animals to the Cartwright ranch for training. Will's instincts for business and land management complemented Tessa's animal expertise perfectly. They expanded gradually, adding more acreage, more horses, and eventually a small herd of quality cattle. Helen stayed on as their housekeeper and cook, and she became like a mother to both of them. She was there when, in the late summer of 1870, Tessa began to feel ill in the mornings. She was there when the doctor confirmed that Tessa was pregnant, and she was there to see the joy on both Tessa's and Will's faces when they learned they would become parents. The pregnancy was not easy. Tessa, who had never been sick a day in her life, found herself exhausted and nauseous for months. But Will was attentive and patient, taking over her heavier duties with the horses and making sure she rested. He brought her ginger tea for the nausea and read to her in the evenings when she was too tired to keep her eyes open. In March of 1871, exactly 1 year after Will had proposed, Tessa gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Samuel William Cartwright, and he had his father's blue eyes and his mother's auburn hair. Will held his son with such careful awe that Tessa fell in love with him all over again. "I have everything I ever wanted," Will whispered that first night, sitting beside Tessa's bed with Samuel cradled in his arms. "A ranch, a family, a future full of hope. And it all started because a stubborn horse threw a fit and you were kind enough to help." "His loss is my fortune," Tessa said softly, echoing the words Will had once said to her. "Thomas leaving was the worst thing that happened to me until it became the best thing, because it led me here to you, to this life we are building together." Over the next few years, the Cartwright ranch flourished. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Rose Helen in 1873, and another son, James Andrew, in 1875. The ranch grew to over 400 acres, and their reputation for quality horses spread throughout Nevada and into California. They built a proper house, large enough for their growing family but never ostentatious. Will wanted comfort and security, not displays of wealth. Tessa proved that she was more than capable of balancing motherhood with her work. She taught the children to ride almost before they could walk, and they grew up understanding horses the way she did, with patience and respect. Samuel, in particular, showed a gift for training, and Tessa delighted in working alongside her son as he grew older. Helen, who had become Grandma Helen to the children, remained with them until she passed peacefully in her sleep in 1880. They buried her on a hillside overlooking the ranch she had helped build, and planted roses over her grave. Tessa mourned her deeply, grateful for the years of friendship and support. The children grew strong and healthy, surrounded by love and the wild beauty of Nevada. Samuel became a skilled horseman and trainer, eventually taking over much of that aspect of the ranch. Rose inherited her mother's practical intelligence and her father's head for business, and she managed the financial side of the operation with impressive competence. James, the baby, turned out to have a gift for working with cattle, and he expanded that part of the ranch significantly. Through it all, Tessa and Will's love deepened and matured. They had their disagreements, as any married couple does, but they faced them with respect and honesty. They never went to bed angry, and they never stopped courting each other, even decades into their marriage. Will still brought Tessa wildflowers from the meadows, and she still packed his favorite meals when he had to travel for business. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1890, Will took Tessa back to the spot where he had proposed. Their children were grown, or nearly so. The ranch was thriving, and they had built something remarkable together. They stood hand in hand, watching the sunset paint the mountains in brilliant colors, and Tessa reflected on the long, strange journey that had brought her here. "Do you ever think about how different your life would be if Thomas had not left?" Will asked, reading her thoughts as he so often did. "Sometimes," Tessa admitted. "I think I would have stayed in a mediocre marriage, never knowing what real love felt like. I would have been comfortable, maybe, but never truly happy. Thomas leaving broke me open, but you helped me heal stronger than before. Every moment of pain was worth it because it led me to you. His loss was truly my fortune," Will said, pulling her close. "And I have spent every day of the last 20 years trying to treat you the way you deserve to be treated, the way he never did." "You have succeeded," Tessa said simply. "I have never doubted your love, not for a single moment. You gave me everything I thought I had lost, my dignity, my purpose, my happiness. You gave me a family and a home and a partnership that has made me better than I ever could have been alone." As the sun dipped below the mountains, and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Will kissed his wife with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day 20 years before. Around them, the ranch they had built together spread out in the gathering dusk, full of horses and cattle, fields and fences, the home where their children had been raised and where, eventually, their grandchildren would play. Thomas Morgan had made his choice all those years ago in the summer of 1869, and in making it, he had set Tessa free to find real love. Will Cartwright had seen her value when she could not see it herself, and he had spent 2 decades proving that his words were not empty promises. He had treated her better, loved her better, built a life with her that was richer than anything she had imagined possible. In the years that followed, as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the Cartwright Ranch became legendary in the Carson Valley. People spoke of Will's business acumen and Tessa's way with horses, but those who knew them best spoke of something else. The deep, abiding love between the two founders, a love that had been born from hardship and grown into something unshakable. When Tessa was in her 60s, a young woman came to the ranch seeking advice. She had been abandoned by her husband and did not know how to move forward. Tessa sat with her on the porch of the big house, watching the horses graze in the distance, and told her story. She spoke of pain and shame, of taking a chance on hope when everything seemed hopeless, and of finding love when she least expected it. "The worst moment of your life might be the doorway to the best," Tessa said. "I will not tell you it will be easy, because it will not be. But if you are strong and patient and open to possibility, you might be surprised by what comes next. Someone might see your value even when you cannot see it yourself. And that someone might say to you what my Will said to me: 'His loss is my fortune, and I will treat you better.'" The young woman left with tears in her eyes and hope in her heart, and Tessa watched her go with satisfaction. She had lived long enough to see the world change in remarkable ways, but some truths remained constant. Love, real love built on respect and partnership, could heal almost anything. And sometimes the worst betrayal could lead to the greatest blessing. Will found her on the porch as the afternoon faded into evening, and he settled into the chair beside her with a contented sigh. They were both silver-haired now, with lines on their faces that spoke of decades lived fully. But when he took her hand, the gesture was as natural and necessary as breathing, unchanged by time. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," Tessa replied. "That day you hired me to gentle your horses, the first time you told me you loved me. Our wedding day, the births of our children, all the years in between. I am thinking about how grateful I am for all of it, even the painful parts that brought me here." "I am grateful too," Will said, "for every moment we have had and every moment yet to come." They sat together in the gathering twilight, hands clasped, hearts intertwined, surrounded by the life they had built from ashes and hope. The ranch sprawled around them, full of family and purpose, a testament to what two people could create when they loved each other truly and well. The past, with all its pain, had faded to a distant memory, important only for the lessons it taught and the path it had cleared. The present was rich and full, and the future, however long or short, would be faced together. In the stable, horses nickered softly as they settled for the night. In the house, their daughter Rose was preparing dinner for the family gathering planned for tomorrow. In the fields, cattle grazed peacefully under the watchful eye of their youngest son. And on the porch, Tessa and Will Cartwright held hands and watched the stars emerge one by one over the Sierra Nevada. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful that would endure long after they were gone. It was more than Tessa had ever dreamed possible on that awful day in August 1869, when her world had collapsed. It was more than Will had dared hope for when he had first started saving his pennies for a ranch of his own. But together, they had created not just a successful business, but a legacy of love and partnership that their children and grandchildren would carry forward into the new century. The wind whispered through the aspen trees, carrying the scent of sage and pine, and Tessa closed her eyes and breathed it in. This was home. This was family. This was love that had endured every test and emerged stronger. And it had all begun with a frightened horse, a kind gesture, and a cowboy who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself. "Thank you," she whispered to Will. "For what? For seeing me. For choosing me. For loving me the way you promised you would." "Thank you for letting me," Will replied. "For taking a chance on a rough cowboy with more dreams than money. For building this life with me. For being my partner in everything." They kissed, a gentle touch of lips that held 20 years of history and a lifetime of devotion. And then they sat in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate, and the sound carried across the valley, wild and free and full of longing answered. Tessa thought of the girl she had been, standing on the dusty street of Genoa with a letter in her hand and no idea what to do next. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that everything would be all right, that the pain would pass, and the future would be brighter than she could possibly imagine. But perhaps it was better that she could not. Perhaps the journey was necessary, every stumble and triumph, every fear and moment of courage. It had all led here, to this porch, to this man, to this life. Years continued to pass in the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Grandchildren arrived, 10 in total, and they filled the big house with laughter and chaos. Tessa taught them all to ride and to understand horses, passing down the knowledge that had once saved her. Will taught them about business and integrity, about keeping their word and treating people fairly. Together, they created a family culture built on love and mutual respect. When their 50th wedding anniversary arrived in 1920, the whole valley seemed to celebrate with them. People came from miles around to honor the couple who had become a beloved institution in the area. The party was held at the ranch, with tables groaning under the weight of food, musicians playing lively tunes and children running wild under the watchful eyes of their parents. Samuel, now nearly 50 himself, stood to give a toast. "My parents taught me many things," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "They taught me how to work hard, how to treat animals with kindness, and how to run a successful business. But the most important thing they taught me was how to love. I watched my father treat my mother with unwavering respect and devotion every single day of my life. I watched my mother be a true partner to my father, his equal in every way. They showed me that marriage is not about ownership or control, but about two people choosing each other again and again, through every season of life." There was not a dry eye in the crowd as Samuel finished his speech and raised his glass. "To Will and Tessa Cartwright, the finest people I have ever known and the best parents anyone could ask for. May we all be so lucky in love." The toast was echoed by everyone present, and Tessa looked around at the faces of her children and grandchildren, at the friends and neighbors who had become like family, at the ranch that had grown from a rough cabin, and a few corrals into something magnificent. But most of all she looked at Will, whose blue eyes still sparkled with mischief and love, whose hand still found hers automatically, whose presence beside her still felt like the greatest blessing of her life. 50 years, she murmured. "Can you believe it?" "Feels like both forever and no time at all," Will replied. "I would do it all again in a heartbeat. So would I. Every moment." As the party continued around them, they slipped away to their favorite spot, the hillside where Helen was buried, and where they had stood so many times over the decades. The view was the same as always, mountains rising dramatically against the sky, the valley spread below, the ranch with its buildings and fences and grazing animals. But it was also constantly changing, shifting with the light and the seasons, never quite the same twice. "We did well," Will said softly. "I know I have said it before, but I want to make sure you know. We built something good here, Tessa. Not just the ranch, but the family, the legacy. Our children are good people raising good children. The ranch will continue long after we are gone. We made something that matters." "We did," Tessa agreed. "And it all started because you were brave enough to offer me a job and kind enough to see past the scandal. You gave me a second chance at life, Will. You let me be myself, all of myself, and you loved me for it. You did the same for me. I was just a cowboy with a dream. You made that dream into a reality. You were never just my wife, Tessa. You were my partner, my equal, my best friend. Everything we built together." They stood in silence, hands joined, hearts full, watching the sun set on their 50th anniversary. They had been granted more years than many people receive, and they had used those years well. There had been losses, of course. They had buried friends and family members, including Helen, who they still missed terribly. They had weathered droughts and economic hardships, illnesses and setbacks. But through it all, they had held onto each other and onto the love that had been forged in the difficult days of 1869 and 1870. As the last light faded from the sky, they walked slowly back down the hillside toward the party still in full swing. Their steps were slower now than they had been in their youth, but they were taken together, in perfect synchronization, the way they had done everything for half a century. The years that followed were quieter but no less rich. Tessa and Will gradually handed over the daily operations of the ranch to their children, content to advise and observe rather than manage. They took long walks together, received visits from grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren, and spent peaceful evenings on the porch watching the world they had shaped continue to grow and evolve. Tessa passed away peacefully in the winter of 1926, surrounded by her family, at the age of 89. She had lived a long, full life, transforming from a discarded wife into a matriarch whose influence touched hundreds of lives. Her final words were to Will, who sat beside her holding her hand just as he had done for 56 years. "Thank you for loving me so well. Wait for me." "Always," he promised, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I will love you beyond death, beyond everything. You are my heart, Tessa. You always were." She smiled then, that rare, brilliant smile that lit up her whole face, and closed her eyes for the last time. Will held her as she slipped away, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, and when she was gone, he kissed her forehead gently and whispered, "His loss was my fortune, and I treated you better. I hope you know I tried every day to deserve you." Will lived another 2 years, long enough to ensure the ranch was secure in the capable hands of his children and grandchildren. He spent those years quieter and more withdrawn, a piece of him having gone with Tessa. But he also spent them telling stories to anyone who would listen, stories about the remarkable woman he had loved, about how they had met and built a life together, about the partnership that had been the foundation of everything good in his life. When he passed in the spring of 1928, he was laid to rest beside Tessa on the hillside overlooking the ranch, next to Helen, who had been there at the beginning. The headstone was simple but elegant. Will and Tessa Cartwright, partners in life, love, and legacy. Their fortune was each other. The ranch continued for generations after them, passed down through the family, always keeping the values and traditions that Will and Tessa had established. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It became a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are doorways to the best, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, and that when someone sees your worth and promises to treat you better, they just might change your entire world. In the Carson Valley, when people spoke of the Cartwright Ranch, they spoke not just of successful business or quality horses, but of a love story that had become the stuff of legend. They spoke of a woman abandoned who found her strength, and a cowboy who recognized that strength and built a life around it. They spoke of his loss being her fortune, and how that fortune multiplied into something that blessed everyone it touched. And on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the aspen trees and the last light painted the Sierra Nevada mountains gold, some people swore they could see 2 figures standing hand in hand on the hillside, looking out over the ranch they had built together, still choosing each other, still in love, for all eternity. The story of Will and Tessa Cartwright became more than just their own. It became a testament to resilience and second chances, to the power of seeing and being seen, to the radical act of loving someone well and letting yourself be loved in return. It became proof that sometimes the cruelest betrayal can lead to the greatest blessing, and that the person who treats you better might just be waiting right around the corner, ready to turn your loss into fortune beyond measure. Their legacy lived on not just in land and horses, and the successful ranch that bore their name, but in every marriage, their descendants entered with the understanding that love is a partnership, that respect and devotion matter more than passion alone, and that choosing each other every day is the truest form of romance. It lived on in the way their grandchildren and great-grandchildren treated their own spouses, in the stories told around dinner tables, in the values passed down through generations. And so the story that began on a dusty street in Genoa, Nevada in August of 1869, with a heartbroken woman and a broken letter, ended not with an ending at all, but with a continuation that rippled outward through time, touching lives that Will and Tessa would never meet, but influencing them nonetheless. Their love became immortal not because it was perfect, but because it was real, hard-won, and built on the unshakable foundation of two people who saw each other clearly and chose each other completely, every single day, for the rest of their lives.